So you're brand new to crochet, you want to make your first project, but you have no clue where to start. Let me help you. Hey there, and welcome to B.Hooked, the place where you and I turn yarn into anything we want, hobby or lifestyle. Particularly for you, you're diving into this for the first time. You've never made a project before or anything, and you're looking for a place to start. Well, I know you're anxious to dive right into the tutorial, and trust me, I know I was too when I was a brand new beginner, but there's a couple things you really need to know before we can get started to set you up for success, right? That's what I'm about. I want to set you up for success and not stress. Okay, so crochet is very easy. You only need a few things. For this project, you'll need, of course, a crochet hook. Now, when you go to your craft store, look for a 10mm crochet hook. I'll be using this guy right here. This is a Clover & More. It's a plastic material. I find this hook very easy and very comfortable to work with. Hold it in your hand, figure out what feels comfortable for you, because crochet hooks are all about personal preference. This is a great starting point though. Clover & More, 10mm, it's got the purple grip. Now once you've got your hook, the next thing you'll need is your yarn. So we'll be using Peyton's Classic Wool Bulky. For this project, you want to get 4 skeins of this. And by the way, this color is called Natural Mix. Goes beautifully with the sweater that I'm wearing, which is where I plan to coordinate the scarf with this particular outfit. I think that's a great approach. When you're making something new, you want to make something that you'll actually want to wear. And so if you just pick a random color that you have no clothes or no sweaters to go with, well, trust me, from my experience, you won't wear it. So find a sweater you really love, pick a color of this yarn that coordinates with that, and get 4 skeins of it. Now the last thing you'll need is a darning needle or a tapestry needle. Now you probably can't see this very close there, but this is a wide-eyed tapestry needle. It has a big hole so that I can fit this bulky yarn through. You'll need just one of these. They're super cheap. Grab that, your 4 skeins of yarn, your 10mm crochet hook, and now we can learn how to crochet. Okay, so important lesson number 1 is that just about every crochet project starts off with something called a slip knot. It's super easy to make.
So I have just the tail end of my yarn here, and there's several ways to do this, but I find this way to be the easiest. So grab your tail, wrap it around your index finger 2 times, sort of steadying it with my 2 fingers there, and then I want to take this loop and just place it over this one, leaving that top one exposed. Then I'll take that one, pull it up and over the tip of my finger. Then when I pull this, it'll cinch up that slip knot. Then I can take my hook and place that loop there. Now I should be able to pull my working yarn, which is this right here, and it'll tighten that up so it's on my hook.
Piece of cake, right? The slip knot's not too bad. Practice it a couple of times, get really comfortable with it, and then we're ready to move into our foundation. So every crochet project has to start off with some kind of foundation. So we've got our slip knot first, followed by our foundation. Now the foundation is made up of chain stitches, and it's sometimes called a foundation chain. That's going to be the foundation of our scarf here, so let's do that next.
So the first thing you'll really need to master is how to hold everything as you're working, and this is going to come with practice. Go ahead and just allow your working yarn, so this guy right here, to sit over top of your index finger, and then it's laying in front of my other 3 fingers. Then I'll grab that tail with my pinky and my ring finger, and then I'm sort of off to the races. This is a very basic grip for crochet projects. Now something else you can do is get that tail through these 2 fingers and then pinch that one off too. The purpose of doing this is to have some tension on the working yarn. That way you can actually do the motions. If it's sort of just flopping around in your hands, you'll quickly realize that it's very difficult. So grab the yarn so it looks something like this, and we'll start off with the chain stitch. This is a very basic crochet stitch. All I'll do is take my hook, and I'm just really going to twist it. Use that twisting motion. I'll grab that working yarn, twist my hook so that it's pointed down, and then pull it through the loop that was on my hook. And we'll do that once more. Grab the working yarn, twist your hook down, pull it through. Now you can see I'm letting the working yarn flow through my fingers in the background to help me through this process. If you pinch it and you hold on to it, then you won't be able to get the yarn to go through your fingers and you won't be able to work your stitches. We want to get a lot of really good practice with the chain stitch, so go ahead and make 154 chains. So you might be asking, well, how do I know how to count these chains? Well, after you've worked a few, if you look at it from the front, it looks sort of like a braid, right? So each one of these braids is one chain. So we'll start here at the very bottom. See that V or that part of the braid? That's one chain. Then we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. We need 154. We're basically starting our scarf off on one edge and making a full length of the scarf with the chain. We're doing this because as a beginner, it's a little difficult to get your edges to be really straight. So if you're working a scarf that let's say we want to be 70 inches long, if we're working in short rows, well, we have 70 inches worth of possibilities of having crooked edges, and that's one thing you don't want. So this particular pattern is great for beginners because we only have a few rows and only a few instances to potentially have wobbly or uneven edges.
Now, as you're working your chain stitches, please keep in mind that, first of all, it's going to look probably terrible. It's going to look a little wonky, a little messy. It's going to feel super weird. The yarn's not going to go through your fingers very well. It's going to feel weird having the hook and you might get the hook caught on the yarn. This is all completely normal. Now, I have been crocheting for several years, so I have a lot of practice under my belt. Don't use my motions as a standard for what's normal. Just know that as a beginner, it's going to be awkward, it's going to look bad, and you're going to get better. All right, so don't be too hard on yourself. Make your 154 chains and count them as you go. It's not a big deal if you don't have exactly 154, but keep in mind that the length of this chain is going to be the length of your scarf. So if you want it a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, this is the place to make those adjustments if you feel comfortable doing so. Otherwise, chain 154, and we'll start off with row number 1. So I promised you that you would learn 3 fundamentals in this tutorial. We've covered the chain stitch, and by the way, the slip knot was just a little bonus. The second stitch we're going to learn is called the single crochet.
All right, so now that we have our chain complete, I have 154 chains. I'm ready to start off on my first row. So right now, I like to orient things with my chain sort of off to this side here on the opposite side of where my hook is because I'm going to be working in this direction. That's always going to be the case. You'll work from this side over to that side. So looking at your work, find your very last chain that you made. So this guy right here. By the way, this loop on your hook never counts as a chain. So this is 154 for me. So when I look at it from this way, I can see a V or I can see the braid. Well, you may have noticed if you flip it over, we have all these little bumps or ridges. It kind of looks like a spine. Now, I particularly like to work in this back bump of the chain. This is all personal preference, but it does give you a nice cleaner edge. Okay, so I'm finding that first bump and I want to ignore it. I'll find the second bump and that's where I want to work my first single crochet. So I'm just going to turn it this way. You can see this is the bump right there. And that's where I want to stick my hook into. Now grab your working yarn. And again, I sort of have it laying through my fingers like this, just sort of holding onto it with my pinky and my ring finger, working under these 2 fingers and looping it over my index finger. So grab that working yarn and pull it through the chain, so through this loop. Then you'll have 2 loops on your hook. I want to go ahead and push my loops down because you may or may not be able to tell, but this hook is a little bit skinnier down here than right here. This is a tension trick. It's going to make your stitches look a lot more even. So then grab that working yarn or just loop it around your hook, and notice again that I'm using these twisting motions. I'll make my hook so that it's facing down, then I'll pull this loop through both of these. And that's how to make the single crochet. So find your next chain, or for me, that next bump. You can see it right there. I'll stick my hook into that loop. Grab the working yarn, pull it through the chain. Then grab the working yarn, turn it down, pull through those 2 loops. Now we have 2 single crochets. Now yours might look a lot tighter than this, and that is very normal for a beginner. I'm letting the yarn really flow through my fingers, and this just comes with practice. A lot of beginners struggle with making their stitches look even. Sometimes they look too tight, sometimes they even look too loose. It's really just getting the hang of it, learning how to let everything flow through your hands as you're working the stitch. And what I find is that the more you muscle it, the more you sort of fight with your working yarn, the worse it's going to look. That's always our natural reflex, is to sort of just muscle it, to really push the hook through and really grab that working yarn and pull everything tight. I know for me, I thought, well, if I pull really tight, then it'll all look uniform and neat, but that's the opposite is actually true in that case. The more you pull on it, the worse it's going to look. So now I've worked through a few stitches and it does look a little bit curly. This is totally normal. What I like to do is just take it, hold it in my fingers, just give it a small little tug, and that will settle in the stitches. It'll get nice and even and straight. Now once again, if your stitches are a little bit wobbly, tension doesn't look right, so maybe the stitches are tighter or looser, don't worry. This comes with practice. So as I'm working, my chain has a tendency to twist, and that's totally normal as well. So I just want to make sure I untwist it. I'm finding that back bump and I'm working my hook there. Now I actually saw my working yarn was sitting in front of the hook there. You don't want to start working your stitch if that's the case. So it would look something like this, and then things can get all crazy from here. So make sure your working yarn is at the back of your hook. So when you're looking at it like this, then you can stick your hook in the chain, just grab that working yarn from your finger, yarn over, pull through 2. All right, so work this until you get to your very last chain. We'll pick up at the end of this row and we'll talk about row number 2. We're going to learn a new stitch.
Now, after making the single crochet more than 100 times, you're probably pretty comfortable with it. So now let's look at our third and final stitch, the double crochet.
So once you made it back to your slip knot and your little tail there, that's how you know you're at the end of row number 1. Now, what do we do from here? Well, we always want to crochet from this direction moving over there, and we can't go anymore. So what we need to do is turn our work. Now, since we have this big long line or this big long piece of just single crochets, ideally you want to take your work and flip it like you're turning the page of a book. However, since we've got this big long piece, it's a little more messy. So I'm still working in that same motion. So I flipped it like the page of a book, and now I'm looking at this side of the work. You'll notice it looks just slightly different than that first side. So for row 2, we're going to learn a new stitch, the double crochet. But before we can start that, we need to work a couple of chains. And the reason for these 2 chains is because a double crochet is basically double the height of a single crochet. So stick with me here. Make 1 chain. So I've got my loop there. I've just wrapped the yarn around the hook and then I pull that through. So that's 1 chain. Then I'm going to wrap the yarn pull through for the second chain. Now here's a little tip. I mentioned wobbly edges and how that can really be a thing for beginners. We're going to avoid that completely by using stitch markers. Now you can pick these up at your local craft store, but chances are you probably don't have one of these. And if that's the case, go grab a bobby pin. They work just as well. So I want to take my stitch marker or my bobby pin and just attach it to this last chain that I made. That's going to be my visual cue that I need to work my last stitch here on the next row. So just keep that in your mind. Don't worry about it anymore from this point on. Now looking at my work from this direction, I need to figure out where to work my first stitch. Well, technically, this chain 2 is counting as our first stitch. So in working our next one, I want to look just one over from where I'm at. So the chain is coming from this stitch. So I want to focus my attention on the next one. Now you can look at it from the top as well, and you'll see that there's a V or the similar braid there on the top. This is the first piece, so that's the first stitch. This is the second stitch. So I want to focus my attention on this one right here. Now I want to let you in on a little secret. Anywhere you can stick your hook, you can basically put a stitch there. But in order to come up with a pattern that looks consistent, then we want to focus our attention on a specific loop. So the V is situated in this direction right here. This is the back loop because it's away from me. This is the front loop because it's closest to me. So I want to work my stitches in this back loop only. So it will be right here. Now, I mentioned we're going to learn a new stitch, so forget everything you learned about that single crochet and focus on the double crochet now. So to work a double crochet, you first want to wrap the yarn around your hook. Then you'll stick your hook into that back loop of that stitch we just pointed out. Then yarn over, pull that through the stitch or through that loop, and you'll have 3 loops left. Then I'll take my working yarn, wrap it around again, pull it through these 2, and then I'm left with 2, so I'll yarn over and pull through the remaining 2. That's a double crochet. You can see it's about twice the height of that single crochet. Pretty cool, huh? So find our next stitch. So this is a little bit easier. Once you have that first stitch figured out, I can just look and say, oh hey, here is the next V. That's where I want to work my next stitch. So for the double crochet, we'll wrap the yarn. I'm sticking my hook in that back loop only. Yarn over, pull up a loop. Yarn over, pull through 2. Then yarn over and pull through 2. Find the next stitch, work in the back loop only, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And once you have a few stitches worked, this is what your work will begin to look like. And for row 2, we just want to make 1 double crochet in the back loop of every single one of our stitches. So now as you're getting close to the end of your row, you need to watch the V's up at the top. That's going to tell you where your last stitch is. So if you look here, you can see 2 V's or 2 little parts of a braid. That's how I know I have 2 stitches left. So I'll work my double crochet here. And then work my double crochet in this last V in that back loop only.
All right, so let's take a minute to put everything together. So far, we've learned the slip knot, we've learned the foundation chain and the foundation of our scarf, the single crochet, and the double crochet. But if we were to just leave it at that, we would have a really skinny scarf. We just need to work a repeat in order to make it a little bit wider. So the repeat for this pattern is 2 rows, row number 1 and row number 2. Now don't let that confuse you. We're basically just giving ourselves an easy way of saying how to repeat a pattern. So we have row number 1, which was our single crochet row. Then we have row number 2, which was a double crochet row. That's our repeat. So single crochet, double crochet, single crochet, double crochet, and we're just going to repeat that. But I know you want to have a little more practice. Maybe you've forgotten the single crochet. So let's have a look at how to start and how to work through that single crochet row once again.
So just like before, when we finish up a row, we always have to turn our work so that we can set ourselves up to start crocheting again. So again, because this is a big long project, I'm just going to sweep it off to the side as I turn it just like that. And instead of chaining 2 at the beginning, we're only going to chain 1. This is because a single crochet is shorter than a double crochet. So I'll chain 1 and then I'll start my single crochets. Now, just like before, we'll work in the back loop only, but we're going to do something a little different. Whenever you work with single crochet stitches, this chain 1 does not count as a stitch. It's really just a way to get us up to the proper height so that our edge is nice and straight. So find your first stitch, your first V right here, stick your hook in that back loop only, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Now remember, that's the motion for the single crochet. Now, just like before, we want to make our lives a little easier. When we're beginners, we don't need to worry about counting or anything like that. So any way we can help ourselves, we're going to take that route. So I've got another stitch marker here. If you've got another bobby pin, that's what you want to go with. I'm going to mark that stitch. So I'm really just placing it around the V there. That's going to tell me that after I've worked this row and I get all the way back to this point here, hey, this is my last stitch. This is where you'll work your last stitch. Okay? So now from here, we'll continue making a single crochet in the back loop of every stitch. So I've made it now to the end of row number 3. I have just a few more stitches remaining. So I can see 2 V's and then I've got my stitch marker. Well, let's first take care of these last 2 V's or these last 2 stitches by making a single crochet into each of them. Now, if you recall, anytime we place a stitch marker, that's your visual cue that that is where you should work your last stitch for that round. So I know that I need to make a stitch there. I'll release my stitch marker, make my single crochet in that chain, and that will be my final stitch for this round. Now let's talk about that for just a moment. This chain 2 we said counted as a double crochet, and I want to give you a little tidbit there that chaining 2 as a double crochet goes against the standard, we'll call it. Normally you would chain 3. This is totally not important for you moving forward, but if you continue to crochet, you may see that it's standard to make 3 chains for a double crochet. For me personally, I like the way this looks a little bit better. It gives you a straighter edge.
Now, you've probably guessed it, we're going to move into the double crochet row. This is the second row of our repeat. Once again, you may have forgotten how to do the double crochet, so let's have a look at that again.
Now, whenever you start on a double crochet row, we're going to chain 2. So 1 and 2, and then I'll take my stitch marker and I'll stick it in that last chain that I made so that I know, hey, that's where you need to work your last stitch when you get back to it. Okay, so because we have a chain 2 here, we are not going to work in this first stitch. Okay, so in double crochets, we're not going to work right here on the single crochet row, however we do. So find your next V and we'll work a double crochet in the back loop only. And then I'll just continue this until I reach the end of my row once again, making a double crochet into the back loop of every stitch.
Okay, so eventually you'll get to the point where you run out of yarn in your skein and you need to add on a new skein of yarn to proceed with your scarf. So let me show you how quick and simple it is to add in a new ball of yarn.
So I just have a little bit of yarn left. It's about 10 inches or so. And I'm ready to make that switch to my new skein of yarn. So to do that, I'll pretend as though I'm going to finish a double crochet. So I'm just working into that back loop of the next stitch. So I'll yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. And I want to pause there because this is where I'll add on that new skein. So grab the end of your new yarn and you just want to fold down about 6 to 8 inches and just leave that little loop there. So tail is here, working yarn is coming out that back side there. I'll place that loop on my hook and I'll use this to finish the stitch by pulling through these 2. But before we can move on, we need to secure things because we've got 2 loose ends here. What I like to do is simply tie a knot in them. You can go ahead and pull relatively tight. I wouldn't pull too hard. Just give that a double knot and then we're ready to go. So we'll worry about these in just a little bit. I'll show you how to weave those in so you can hide them and you're ready to continue on with your row and with your new skein of yarn. Now I've reached the end of row 4. I have just 2 stitches remaining. So I'll work a double crochet in the back loop of this second to last. And then of course I have my stitch marker here in this last V. That tells me that this is where I need to work my last stitch of this round.
Now I want you to try to tackle that on your own. Go ahead and work a single crochet row and a double crochet row, and then we'll come back and have a look at our scarf then.
So after completing that little repeat, your scarf should now look something like this, and it's really starting to look like a scarf now.
First of all, let me just say I'm so proud of you for making it this far. We're more than halfway finished with our scarf. We are almost there in the final stretch. I want you to tackle that repeat 2 more times. So repeat rows 1 and 2, single crochet, double crochet row. Repeat that twice more. So we're adding an additional 4 rows.
So now after you've completed that repeat, your scarf should look something like this, and we should be able to count 5 little bumps or those ridges. Now the next lesson here is that the difference is in the details, my friends. We started with the single crochet row here on the bottom edge. Well, we've ended on a double crochet row, and so it's not exactly the same from one side to the next. Well, we're going to fix that by adding a single crochet row. So just like before, all you'll need to do is chain 1, turn your work, and then we'll make 1 single crochet in the back loop of every stitch. This is going to be the final row of your scarf. Now once you finish that section, then the crocheting portion of this scarf is complete. The last thing we need to do here is fasten off, and we'll do that. Just place your hook down, grab some scissors, and leave yourself a tail that's 6 to 8 inches. Just go ahead and trim that, and then take your crochet hook, wrap the tail around it, and then pull it through that loop. That's going to fasten it off and secure it so that way you can tug on that and your stitches aren't going to come apart.
All right, my friend, we are in the final stretches of your scarf. Congrats again for making it this far. The last thing we need to do is weave in the ends. So we're going to hide those little tails.
So choose one side of your scarf to weave in all of your ends on. Again, the difference is in the details. We want to make sure that we're weaving them in all on the same side. And since this is a scarf, technically there's really no right or wrong way. It's reversible, the stitch pattern is, so it looks pretty much the same on each side. So find a row of stitches, and then you'll run your darning needle under some of those stitches. And I like to go 3 to 4, sometimes even 5 stitches at a time in one direction. So I'll pull that through, and then I'll flip it around and go back in the opposite direction. So I want to make sure I'm sort of jumping a loop there, because if I go back in the same spot, then I'll just undo what I just did. So I'm skipping a loop there, working it back, and do that as many times as you can for the size of your tail. Now you don't want to pull it so tight that your stitches scrunch together. So you can see I'm just sort of playing with it with my fingers to get it to lay nice and smooth. Then I'll grab my scissors and just trim that off. That's all there is to it. You want to do that for all of your ends.
A big congrats to you. Your scarf is now complete. A little fist bump is in order here. It was a real pleasure to play a small part in this accomplishment of yours. I'm so proud of you, and if you love this video, if you love crocheting now, if I've opened up this whole new world to you, would love for you to check out some of the videos here to the side of your screen. I'm Brittany from B.Hooked. I've made it my life's mission to be able to teach you how to do the thing that I love, knit and crochet, and you'll find hundreds of videos and free patterns to do just that over on my website, BHookedCrochet.com. That'll do for today's episode. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. Bye for now. Well, my friend, I'm here to help. We're gonna crochet our first scarf together. You and I will crochet our first scarf together. It's not actually my first scarf though. It's your first scarf.